Good morning. My name is Samuel Morris, and this is Elementary English. I'm glad you're here. Today, we are going to go over reading to understand the author's perspective. Now, you might remember that last week we spoke about reading to understand the author's purpose. This week, we're talking about the author's perspective. So those words, while they sound similar, are actually pretty different. The author's purpose, if you remember the acronym PIE, P-I-E, is to persuade, inform, or entertain. That's why the author wrote what the author wrote. This week, in perspective, however, it's what the author thinks. What does the author believe? What is their attitude towards the subject? What is their take on the situation in which they're writing? So purpose and perspective are closely related. Today, we're going to look a little bit deeper into author's perspective. So first, we look at a piece of text like we did last week, and we see, okay, here's why the author wrote this. The author wrote this to teach me about something. Then perspective takes it one step further. Well, what do they think about it? If you were sitting down in the room with the author, what would they want to tell you? How would they feel? What would they believe? Let's look at a few examples together, and this is going to make a little bit more sense. For our first example, we're going to look at this sentence where Jack is talking about his house. He's getting ready to move. "The sooner we move out of this dump," said Jack, "the happier I'll be." Let's think. What is the author's perspective about the house? What does Jack think about moving? It seems like Jack's got a pretty bad attitude. How do you know? He called his house a dump, first and foremost, and he said, "The happier I'll be as soon as I can get out of here." You can almost feel Jack just ready to get out. So author's purpose, he was telling us some information, but the author's perspective, Jack's perspective on the house, in the eyes of Jack, he's ready to get out of there. Let's look at another example together. "Mrs. Jones's class is challenging, but I learned so much and I feel confident about the work." What was the author's perspective from the student? What does the student think about Mrs. Jones's class? Now, a lot of times, for author's perspective, they'll tell you exactly how they feel in the text itself. And that's what happens here. We see the student say that Mrs. Jones's class is challenging, but that they learn so much. They feel confident about the work. So we know just from reading that the author's perspective is while the class is challenging, they think it's a good use of their time because they learn a lot and they feel confident afterwards. Let's look at one more example together. "The trend toward full-day kindergarten programs in public schools is taking its toll on the young children of today. Recent studies showing improved reading skills may be misleading. This improvement in reading is unlikely to carry on as these children progress through elementary school." Now, the author's purpose in writing that was to persuade us and to give their take on kindergarten programs and pre-kindergarten programs. Now, we can look at what the author has to say, but we can feel what the author thinks and believes. It's quite evident that the author is not a fan of these programs and doesn't think that they're going to pan out in the future. And we know that because of their writing. So whenever we're identifying author's purpose, we think about why the author wrote something. Whenever we identify author's perspective, we're asking ourselves, what does the author think? What do they believe? What is their attitude about this subject, and how do they feel about everything? Do they want to tell you because they're really excited about it and they can't wait to share it? Or do they want to tell you because they want to recruit you to be against it? Either way, author's perspective is when you put yourself in the shoes of the author and you see what they think. You see what they see. You believe what they believe. You begin to have the attitude that they have. Now, you might have noticed across those three examples that we looked at together, the examples where the author had a bad attitude, I don't know about you, but it made me have a bad attitude because I was reading this author who has a bad attitude about a subject, and I began to have the same bad attitude. But in our example with the student talking about Mrs. Jones's class, I was excited to meet Mrs. Jones. I don't even know if Mrs. Jones exists, but I was excited to meet her because of the author's perspective. So as we can identify author's perspective when we're reading, it's also important to think about how this translates to our writing. When you write something, remember how you felt during this activity. If you want your readers to feel as you feel and to think as you think, believe as you believe, and have those same experiences, then you need to write in an honest and vulnerable and communicative way that tells the reader exactly what you think, exactly what you believe, exactly your attitude, and what your take on the situation is. Remember, the best thing that you can be is yourself. So keep that in mind when you're reading authors' work and identifying both purpose and perspective, but also when you yourself are writing to communicate your thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, and feelings on a subject in the future. I hope this has helped you understand the difference between author's purpose, author's perspective, and even writer's purpose and writer's perspective when you yourself will write soon. So that concludes our lesson for today. And think one more time, the difference between purpose and perspective. Purpose is the why behind the writing, and perspective is the what they think, believe, feel, or their take on the subject. So this week, you can practice. Pick up those books, those newspapers, those magazines from last week that you used to identify author's purpose, and take a little bit of a deeper dive. Put yourself in the shoes of the author and really feel what they feel in order to understand author's perspective just a little bit more, and so you can continue to learn and improve each day. It's been my pleasure to have you in class today. We'll see you next week. My name is Mr. Morris. Thanks for joining.